Picture a room, not a bedroom, just a room. 12 feet by 9 feet if whoever measured it was feeling generous that day, which they probably weren't. Now put 8 people inside it, not visiting, not temporarily sheltering from rain, living. All their possessions, all their smells, all their breathing and coughing and dreaming and crying and dying, everything they have ever owned or could possibly still own, in a space smaller than most people reading this would consider acceptable for a single dog. Now add the damp. The damp that comes up through the floorboards from the cellar directly below, where another family lives in actual darkness, where the ground is soil rather than wood, where in heavy rain the water comes up to ankle level and they pile their children on the one raised platform and wait it out like a slow flood. The damp rises into your room as reliably as morning. It lives in the walls. It turns the plaster soft enough to push your finger into, and sometimes you do absent-mindedly, while thinking about something else, and your finger comes out grey and chalky and smelling faintly of rot. Add the wallpaper, what used to be wallpaper. It stopped being wallpaper sometime around 1865 and has since become something else entirely. A kind of geological record of desperation, grey skin peeling off grey walls in long strips, revealing newsprint underneath. Someone stuffed newspaper between the wallpaper and the plaster for insulation years ago, the kind of small, ingenious survival trick that poor people have always known and comfortable people have never needed to learn. The headlines are still legible in places where the paper hasn't yet gone black with moisture. Disraeli addresses Parliament on the question of reform. Fire in Bermondsey kills 11. You've stopped reading them. They belong to someone else's life. Someone who lived in this room before you, staring at the same peeling edges, reading the same old disasters. Add the window. One window, facing the court. The upper right pane has been gone since before you arrived, replaced with a square of sacking tied tight with string, and then tighter, with a second piece of string, because the first wasn't enough. In winter, frost forms on the inside of the remaining glass. You've seen it some mornings. The geometric crystal patterns that would be beautiful if they weren't also evidence that the temperature inside the room has dropped, to the point where your breath makes clouds all the way across the space. In summer, the sacking lets in flies, and the smell from the court intensifies to something nearly visible, a thickness in the air that you've learned to breathe through your mouth rather than your nose, and even that doesn't help much. And then the smell. That's where we start tonight. Because honestly, if you want to understand what it actually meant to live in a Victorian slum room shared by 8 people, the smell is the first thing you have to reckon with. You can look at photographs of these places. You can read the reports. Charles Booth, with his colour-coded poverty maps. The social investigators who came slumming with their notebooks and their professional compassion. The journalists who spent one night in a common lodging house and then wrote about it, with the careful horror of people who knew they were going home the next day. None of them could give you the smell, so I'm going to try. It's not one smell. It's never one smell. It's the smell of 8 bodies that have not had access to a bath in anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. Depending on who you are and what resources you have and whether the public baths on Commercial Street are charging a penny this week, which they usually are, and whether you have a penny to spare, which you usually don't. It's the particular sourness of skin that has been sweating under wool for too many days in a row. A smell that has its own texture. Almost. Something that coats the inside of your nose and sits there. It's the smell of the chamber pot. The single chamber pot, white enamel with a chip out of the rim, that serves all 8 people and that gets emptied once a day, usually if someone remembers, which is not always guaranteed. On cold nights, when the court outside is dark and the privy at the far end of the yard seems very far away, people use the pot rather than going out. The pot lives in the corner nearest the door. You have learned not to think too hard about what exactly the corner nearest the door smells like. It's the smell of the coal dust that settles on every surface, even in the weeks when you don't have coal. The ghost of combustion that never quite leaves. It's the smell of whatever was cooked last, usually boiled cabbage, sometimes a penny's worth of tripe from the cook shop, occasionally herring that fills the room with a smell that doesn't go away for days. It's the smell of the court outside, which is where the privy is, which is also where the dust heap is, which is also where the standing water pools after rain, and develops its own ecosystem of smells over the subsequent days. And underneath all of it, underneath all those top notes of catastrophe and survival, there is a base note that you stopped noticing after the first month, and that you will never fully stop carrying with you even after you've left this place. The smell of old wood saturated with years of human occupation. The smell of the walls. The smell of a building that has been housing the very poor for longer than any of its current residents have been alive, absorbing and exhaling the accumulated residue of all those bodies, all those nights, all those nearly not quite enough meals. Welcome to Flower and Dean Street, Whitechapel, London. The year is 1884. You're 18 years old. You arrived 8 months ago from Somerset with a canvas bag that held everything you owned, which was a second dress, a shift, a pair of stockings, your mother's Bible, a letter of introduction to a woman named Mrs. Connolly, who was supposedly a decent sort and might know of a position, and 2 shillings and 4pence, which felt like a fortune when you left and felt like almost nothing by the time the train pulled into Paddington, and you understood for the first time, viscerally, and without any possibility of pretending otherwise, how enormous and indifferent and loud London actually was. Mrs. Connolly turned out to be a decent sort. She did know of a position. The position was in the laundry on Brick Lane, Widow Tench's place, where they took in washing from the better-off households in Stepney and Mile End, and worked it through a process that began at 5 in the morning and did not reliably end before 8 at night. The work would ruin your hands inside a year. You knew that before you started. Everyone who works in a laundry knows that. Your hands are the price you pay for the 12 shillings a week. 12 shillings a week sounds like something when you say it that way. 12 shillings a week. That's more than you earned in Somerset, where you were a dairymaid and a general girl of all work at a farm where the farmer's wife paid you in board and 1 shilling and 6 at quarter days. 12 shillings a week sounds like prosperity. Here is what 12 shillings a week actually is, in London in 1884. Your share of the room costs 2 shillings and 3pence per week, paid to Mr. Fitch every Friday before sunset, or he puts your things on the landing and rents your space to someone else. This is not a threat. He has done it. He did it to the woman who used to sleep in the corner by the window, a woman named Elsie, who had a cough that kept everyone awake and who was 3 days late one February Friday, and came back from wherever she'd been to find her bundle in the hallway and the door locked. She stood in the hallway for a while, then she left. You don't know what happened to her. You think about her sometimes, at night, when the coughing starts up again from someone else. Food costs you roughly 5 shillings a week, if you're careful. If you eat bread for breakfast, which you do, and buy your dinner from the cook shops, which you do most days because there is no means of cooking in the room, except the fireplace, which costs coal, which costs money, which is the thing you don't have, A bowl of soup at the cook shop is a penny. A bit of bread and dripping from the baker's at the end of the day is a halfpenny for a large piece. On Sundays you sometimes get a bit of meat, a scrap of mutton from the butcher's end-of-day sale, something you can actually chew rather than something you drink through your teeth. That's 7 shillings and 3pence gone before you've paid for anything else. Coal in winter takes another shilling. Candles take 4pence. The worn-down heel on your left boot needs resoling, and has needed it since November, and the cobbler on Wentworth Street wants 10pence, and you've been putting it off for 6 weeks now, walking with the right side of your foot to avoid the place where the leather has gone through entirely and the wet comes in. Soap, needles and thread. The penny for the public baths when you can manage it, because showing up at the laundry smelling like someone who hasn't bathed since the previous month is grounds for dismissal. And Widow Tench has a nose like a customs officer and opinions about personal hygiene that she will share at volume. By the end of a careful week you have, if the work is steady and nothing breaks and nobody gets sick and it doesn't rain too hard, approximately 10pence left. 10pence is your margin. 10pence is the difference between where you are and the workhouse. This is not a comfortable feeling. It is in fact a feeling that sits in your chest like a stone, all the time, even when you're not consciously thinking about it. You wake up with it, you fall asleep with it. There is never a moment in your days in this room, on this street, in the city, when the stone is not there. But here is what you've learned in 8 months, and what nobody told you before you came, and what the social investigators with their notebooks and their theories somehow failed to fully convey. You get used to it. Not comfortable with it, not reconciled to it, but used to it. The way you get used to the smell. This stone becomes part of your weight, part of how you carry yourself through the day, and the room. The room becomes, in some way that you resent and also depend on, home. Let me tell you about the room. It is on the 2nd floor of a house that was built approximately in 1790 as a respectable artisan's dwelling. A house with 4 floors and a decent staircase and a fanlight over the front door that still has its original glass, which is the most intact thing about the building. In 1790, a weaver and his family lived here, 1 family to 1 building, with a workshop in the basement where the loom would have stood. By 1820, the weaver's trade was dying, killed by the power looms in the north, and the building had been divided. By 1840, each floor was a separate dwelling. By 1860, each room on each floor was a separate dwelling, and the basement had been divided into 2, and the attic space that was never meant to be habitable had 4 people in it. By 1884, when you arrive, the building has been so thoroughly subdivided and patched and propped and jury-rigged for maximum occupation that the original floor plan is almost a rumour. There are people living in a space under the stairs. There's a family in what was clearly once a large cupboard, the kind of large cupboard that Victorian houses built in their better days, big enough to stand up in, maybe 6 feet by 4, with a small high window that gives onto the backyard. The family is a woman and her 3 children under the age of 5. The woman's name is Mrs. Hannigan. She pays 1 shilling and 6 a week for the cupboard, which she has somehow made into something that has a hanging curtain and a shelf with 2 cups and a small figure of the Virgin. You think about Mrs. Hannigan a lot when the stone in your chest gets heavier. You think, at least I have the room. The room. The floor is bare boards, and the boards were laid poorly to begin with and have since warped and shrunk away from each other, leaving gaps between them that let through the cold from the room below, and also occasional sounds, usually coughing, occasionally crying. Once a sound you couldn't identify for a moment and then identified as singing. A low woman's voice singing something in what you think might be Welsh or might be Irish, you can't tell. Something slow and minor and very old coming up through the boards at 3 in the morning while everyone around you slept. The gaps in the boards are also where you hide your money. What money there is! You keep 2 pennies in a crack near the wall by where you sleep, wrapped in a scrap of the old newspaper from the fallen wallpaper. You keep them there because the alternative is keeping them on your person, and you cannot keep them on your person during the 12 hours at the laundry, because pickpocketing among co-workers is not unheard of, and you cannot keep them in the canvas bag because anyone could go through the canvas bag during the hours when you're not there, and you cannot keep them anywhere visible in the room because visible means gone, generally speaking. The crack in the floorboard is your bank. The crack in the floorboard holds everything you have beyond the week's necessities. Currently it holds fourpence. The walls. Already mentioned the walls, the damp plaster, the peeling newspaper revelation, but there is more to say about the walls. On the wall above where the older woman, Mrs. Polly, sleeps, there's a calendar from 1878 that someone nailed up and never took down. It shows a country scene, green hills, improbably blue sky, a cottage with roses around the door. Mrs. Polly has never mentioned the calendar. You've never asked her about it. But you notice sometimes that she lies on her back in the evenings and looks at it for a while before she closes her eyes, and you think you understand something about that without needing to discuss it. On the wall near the door, someone has written in pencil, in a cramped hand, "Do not burn the floorboards." This message is clearly aimed at someone specific, someone who is no longer here, someone who at some desperate point in a cold winter decided that the gap between having warmth and not having it could be bridged by pulling up a board and feeding it into the grate. You don't know if they succeeded. You don't know if it helped. The board is gone. There's a gap near the left of the fireplace where it should be, and the warning remains. The fireplace. The fireplace is a small Victorian iron grate, the kind you see in 10,000 working-class rooms, designed for coal, capable of producing genuine heat when you have coal to put in it and genuine despair when you don't. The mantelpiece above it serves as a shelf for the room's communal objects, which are 1 tallow candle in a cracked tin holder, the emergency candle that everyone agrees is only to be lit in genuine emergency, and about the definition of genuine emergency. There is significant room for disagreement. A chipped enamel mug with no handle that belongs to nobody in particular and everybody uses for water. A bent nail that is used for hanging things. A small tin box in which Mrs. Polly keeps her tea, which is her own private tea and not to be touched. A rule that is respected because Mrs. Polly is 63 years old and has lived on this street for 40 years and has a look that could strip paint. And then the bed. Beds. There are 2 beds in the room, using the word bed somewhat generously. One of them is a wooden frame with a rope lattice, the kind called a rope bedstead, and on the rope lattice there is a sack filled with straw, and on the sack of straw there is a thin wool blanket that is also shared, and this is where 4 people sleep. The other is a straw pallet directly on the floor, a wider sack, less well stuffed, filled with what was straw when it was new, and is now something closer to dust and organic debris. The compressed record of years of bodies lying on it. 4 people sleep on this one too. You are one of the floor people. When you first arrived, you thought about this quite a lot. The sleeping arrangement, the proximity of strangers, the sounds and smells of people you barely knew inches away in the dark. You thought about it while lying there on the first night, rigid with self-consciousness, listening to the woman next to you breathe and the man across the room cough, and the child 2 floors up cry itself to sleep. You thought, this is temporary. This is until something better comes. This is not who I am. 8 months later, you sleep fine. That is the truth about the room, the truth that the social investigators couldn't quite bring themselves to write down with all its implications. The room is terrible, and you sleep fine in it, because your body's exhausted, and your mind has accepted what your pride still hasn't, which is that the room is what you have, and what you have is enough to keep you alive, and keeping alive is currently the only plan. Let me tell you about the other 7. There is Mrs. Polly. You've already glimpsed her, the older woman with the tea and the calendar gaze, but she deserves more than a glimpse. She's 63 years old, small and upright, with white hair pinned so tightly to her head it must hurt, and hands that are extraordinary, knotted and enlarged by 40 years of charring and cleaning and washing and wringing, hands that look like the roots of an old tree, strong and gnarled and somehow permanent. She has lived in this building, in this room or one near it, since she was a young woman. She's outlived a husband and 2 children, the children taken by fever, the husband by his lungs, all of which she mentions without any particular affect, the way you'd mention rain. My Thomas went in 71, she told you once, while helping you unpick a seam in your dress that had come undone. The chest. He was a good man, but he was never strong. My Bessie and my William both went in 67 that summer. You remember the summer. Everyone lost someone that summer. You were a child in Somerset in 1867. You have no memory of any London summer, but you said yes that summer, and she nodded, and that was the end of it. Mrs. Polly works as a charwoman. She cleans the offices of a counting house on Bishopsgate, starting at 5 in the morning, done by 9, and then she cleans for 2 private families in the afternoons. She earns approximately 9 shillings a week, which is less than you, and she has been earning approximately 9 shillings a week for most of her adult life, which tells you something about the mathematics of this kind of work. The fact that decades of experience and reliability and the capacity to be utterly depended upon does not translate into even the most modest raise. She is the unofficial authority of the room, not because she claims the role. She has never claimed anything in her life that I can see, having apparently concluded long ago that claiming things is a luxury for people who can afford the cost of being refused. She is the authority because she is the oldest, and because she has been here longest, and because when there is a dispute about the chamber pot or the candle, or whose turn it is to take the rubbish down to the court, the other 7 people in the room instinctively look at her, and she instinctively produces an answer that everyone usually can live with. Then there are the Fahertys. Michael and Bridget Faherty from County Mayo arrived in London 3 years ago with their daughter Nora, who was then 4 and is now 7, and have since added a son, Patrick, who is 18 months old and is currently at the stage where he can pull himself to standing against the wall and then fall down and then pull himself up again. On and on, over and over, apparently finding this endlessly satisfying, his small, serious face concentrated with effort each time he attempts the manoeuvre. Patrick does not yet walk. Everyone in the room has an opinion about when Patrick will walk. This is one of the ongoing conversational threads of the room, a subject of genuine interest that cuts through the usual silence or exhaustion, or private worry that characterises most evenings. Michael Faherty works on the docks when there is work. This is the critical qualification. when there is work. The docks run on a casual labour system, which means that every morning hundreds of men gather at the dock gates at 6 o'clock, and the foreman comes out and picks who he wants that day, and if you are picked you work and you earn, and if you are not picked you do not. There is no appeal. There is no guarantee tomorrow. Michael is a large, quiet man with careful eyes who leaves the room before 5 every morning, in all weathers, to be at the dock gates in time to be seen and considered. On good weeks he earns 12 or 14 shillings. On bad weeks, nothing. The variation is savage. It is the thing about him that you can see most clearly in his face, the living calculation he is always making, the addition and subtraction that never resolves into a final figure. Bridget Faherty is the person in the room you understand best, or think you do, though she has never said much to you directly. She's 26 years old and looks older, the particular way that poverty and childbearing and insufficient food make people look older, a kind of wearing through, like cloth that's been washed too many times. She washes shirts. She takes in piecework from a shirt factory in Bethnal Green, collars and cuffs at halfpenny a dozen, and she does this while managing Nora and managing Patrick and managing the room's particular geography of people and needs and moods. She's almost always sewing. You've never seen her sit without something in her hands, the white fabric of a collar moving through her fingers in the lamplight, the needle catching small flickers of light. She has told you once, in the brief way she communicates anything personal, that at home in Mayo they had a farm, potatoes and 2 cows, a house with 3 rooms, that the famine was her grandmother's time, but the poverty that came after was her parents' time, and her own time too. Poverty that wasn't starvation, but was its quiet cousin, something that kept you alive while making sure you knew how easily it might stop. Nora Faherty is 7 years old, and goes to the board school on Brady Street, which has been compulsory since the Education Act of 1880. Though the compulsory nature of it is more theoretical than actual in streets like this one, where children are needed for work or minding, or are simply too ill or too poorly fed to sit in a classroom and be educated. Nora goes, though. She goes every day that the school is open, with her slate under her arm and an expression of focused purpose that seems almost comically adult on her small face. She can already read better than several people in the room, a fact that nobody mentions but everyone has noticed. She reads the newspaper when she finds a piece of it. She reads the writing on walls. She reads the labels on bottles. She is 7 and she reads everything, with the hungry attention of someone who understands in some wordless way that reading is something, that reading is a door, that reading is possibly the only door available. Nora Faherty is the person in the room you have the most complicated feelings about. You don't entirely know why. Something about watching her read. Something about the slate she carries, like it matters. Then there is Tommy, Thomas Hare, who is 14 years old and goes by Tommy, and who sleeps on the rope bedstead's far edge, with his knees pulled up to avoid hanging off the end. Tommy's alone in the room without family, which means he got here the way you got here, by coming from somewhere else and ending up, through a chain of small decisions and circumstances, in this particular room at this particular address. He told you he came from Norwich. He told you he's been in London 2 years. He did not tell you what happened in the time between arriving in London and ending up here. There are gaps in Tommy's account of himself that you've learned not to press on. Tommy sells things. This is the most accurate way to put it. He wakes very early before most of the room and goes out and comes back at various points in the day with various things some of which he sells and some of which he keeps, and the nature of both the things and the transactions is not something he discusses in detail. You have seen him come back with a bunch of watercress, which he sold at the corner of Commercial Street for a penny for 3 bunches. You have seen him come back with a collection of metal objects of unclear provenance that he sorted through on the floor for 20 minutes and then took away again in a sack. You have seen him come back with a black eye and say nothing about it. You have seen him share his bread with Nora Faherty without drawing any attention to the fact that he was doing it. Tommy has a cough. The cough started in December and has not stopped. It is not the worst cough in the room, which distinction belongs to Mr. Crane, but it is consistent and it is dry, and it has a quality that makes Mrs. Polly look at him sometimes in a way she doesn't explain. Mr. Crane. William Crane, who is 51 years old, and was, before his lungs became the project they currently are, a journeyman cabinet maker. He has a set of tools in a canvas roll, beautiful tools, handle chisels and gouges and a marking gauge, which he keeps under the pallet and which are the most valuable objects in the room by a considerable distance. He works when he can, which is decreasingly often, because the workshops want men who won't take a coughing fit in the middle of a joint, and because the walk to the furniture district in Shoreditch costs him more strength than it used to. He earns a regular shillings from men he knows, and odd hours of work when someone's behind on an order and needs an extra pair of hands. Mr. Crane is not a complaining man. He is the kind of man that Victorian England produced in great quantities and mostly destroyed without acknowledgement. A skilled man, a proud man, a man who built things with his hands that still stand in drawing rooms he will never enter, furniture that outlasted its maker by decades. He coughs through the nights with a patience that is almost terrible to witness. He keeps his tools clean. He is punctiliously neat with his small portion of space. He pays his rent on time, always, even in the weeks when you don't know how. And then there is Ellen. Ellen is the person in the room you know least about, and who you think about most, which is perhaps not a coincidence. She is about 25, you think, though it's hard to be certain. She has dark hair, and the remnants of what was clearly once a face that people noticed for good reasons, before something happened to the left side of it, a long, thin scar running from her left temple down to the corner of her jaw, the kind of scar that doesn't happen by accident. She never speaks about it. Nobody in the room has ever asked. This is one of the room's social contracts, one of the unwritten agreements that govern what is spoken and what isn't, and the rule about Ellen's face is clear and universal. It is not a subject. Ellen works at a cigar factory on Commercial Road, rolling cigars for 8 hours a day for 7 shillings a week, which is less than you and represents a step down from what she was doing when she arrived in the room 4 months ago, which was something she described as service. She left service. You know from the way she said it that there is an entire history compressed into that phrase, an entire prior life that she has decisively closed like a door, and the scar on her face, and the way she sometimes goes very still when a man raises his voice in the room below, suggest things about that history that you don't pursue. Ellen is the person who knows most about the room, about all the small practical things. She knows that the lock on the front door of the building can be opened with a piece of bent wire if you come home after Mr. Fitch locks it at 10. She knows which of the floorboards will give under pressure and which will hold. She knows where the nearest pump is and whether it's clean, or as clean as any pump gets in Whitechapel, which is a relative assessment. She knows that the damp on the north wall is coming from a broken lead pipe somewhere inside the wall, and will not stop until someone either repairs the pipe or the wall comes down, and she knows which of these outcomes is more likely in a building owned by Mr. Fitch. She showed you the wire trick with the lock 3 days after you moved in. She didn't explain it, she just showed you. That's Ellen, those are your 7. 7 other people whose breathing you know, whose coughs you know, whose particular sounds of waking and sleeping and eating and trying to stay warm you have absorbed over 8 months until they are as familiar as your own heartbeat. More familiar in some ways, because you can hear them when you can't hear yourself. This is the room. This is home. Now let me tell you about a Tuesday in November. Your hands know before your eyes open. The cold gets into the joints of your fingers first every morning, a deep specific ache that lives in the second knuckles and in the base of your thumbs, where the ringing has done its work. The laundry is 10 hours a day of wet and heat and then wet and cold and then wet and heat again. And what it does to hands is what you might expect. The skin cracks, the cracks get red. In cold weather the cracks split and bleed. Just a little, just the thin bright blood that looks wrong against the chapped white skin. You wrap them in rags at night. It helps, some. Your hands wake up before you do. They know this cold, this particular biting November cold that comes through the floorboards and up through the straw and into you while you sleep. They start their aching. You become aware of the aching, and then you open your eyes. The room is still dark. The window square is a pale grey, barely distinguishable from the wall around it. The particular pre-dawn grey that isn't light yet and isn't night. The colour of an unwashed sheet. The shapes of people are lumps in the dimness. You can hear Bridget breathing, slow and steady. Patrick making a small sound in his sleep, a small satisfied sound. Impossible that anything in this room could make a small satisfied sound, but there it is. Mr. Crane. His cough begins at night and modulates through the early morning hours, sometimes quieter, sometimes not. You lie for a moment. This is the moment before everything starts. Before the getting up and the washing of hands in the cold water from the basin, before the putting on of the dress that is still cold from hanging on the nail all night, before the going out into the court and down the street and into the laundry at Brick Lane where the air is thick with steam and caustic soda, and Widow Tench is already standing at the copper muttering about someone's inattention to the collars. This is the moment that costs nothing, the one moment of the day that is entirely yours. You take it. You stare at the ceiling, which you know in the way you know the faces of people you've lived with. Every stain, every crack, the dark corner where the damp has gone nearly black, the place where the plaster is beginning to sag. Not enough to worry about yet, but enough to notice. The way it bulges slightly, holding what must be water somewhere above. Someone will deal with that eventually. Probably the ceiling will deal with it on its own terms. These things tend to be resolved by collapse rather than repair in buildings like this one. Tommy is already gone. You can see the vacancy on the rope bedstead, his corner emptied out, his thin blanket folded with the tidiness he always shows about his space, the only orderly thing about him. He leaves before light. You've never asked where he goes at that hour. You suspect the answer is complicated. You get up. The floor under your bare feet is a shock every time, every morning, even after 8 months. Cold through the soles, up the ankles, the cold that belongs to the season below the one you're currently in, the stored cold of months, the cold of the previous winter still living in the wood. You step across the gap where the board is missing and reach for your dress on the nail. The dress is a grey wool. bought second-hand from a stall on Petticoat Lane Market in September for 8p, which seemed reasonable until you realised one of the seams was entirely rotten, and the first time you lifted your arms at the laundry, the left shoulder gave way entirely. You stitched it back with thread borrowed from Brigid. You've stitched it twice more since then. The stitching shows a different thread colour, a slightly different gauge, the visible record of repairs. You put it on in the dark, the wool rough on your skin, still carrying the smell of yesterday's work, the hot soapy smell of the laundry that settles into wool and doesn't entirely come out with any amount of airing. You pull your hair back without looking by feel, pinning it. You find your boots, the left boot, the one with the heel. You don't have to look at the right boot anymore to know it's the right one. Your feet know. You pull on your shawl. The shawl is the warmest thing you own. Brown wool, thick, a proper shawl, the one thing your mother pressed on you as you left, folded at the top of the canvas bag, and which you have never pawned, even in the weeks when the tenpence margin got eaten by things going wrong. The shawl is the line. Below the shawl you pawn things. The shawl stays. You take the enamel mug from the mantelpiece, carefully, trying not to let it clink, and pour water from the jug into it. The water is cold and has a flat mineral taste that you've come to associate with London water generally, a taste that well water back home never had. Something industrial in it, something that speaks to what the water has passed through to get here. You drink it anyway. You splash some on your face. The cold of it is violent briefly, then just cold. Mrs. Polly is already up. She's sitting on the edge of the rope bedstead, already fully dressed, already upright, her hair already pinned. You don't know when she sleeps and when she doesn't. You've never woken early enough to catch her in the process of getting up. She's simply always already there, already vertical, like a building. She's eating something from a twist of paper, a piece of bread, yesterday's bread by the look of it, hard enough to require serious commitment. She nods at you, you nod back. This is the depth of the conversation at this hour. Neither of you has anything to say that requires words before 5 in the morning, and you've both come to appreciate that about each other. You find the piece of bread you put aside last night on the shelf near the fireplace, under the tin mug, your small deliberate act of future provisioning, the bread you made yourself not eat last night because you knew you'd need it now. It's stale. It's always stale by morning. You eat it standing up in 4 bites, not bothering to taste it, just mechanically filling the part of you that needs filling before the walk to Brick Lane, which is 15 minutes if you walk quickly and the streets aren't jammed, 20 if they are. You pick up your canvas bag, the same one you arrived with 8 months ago, now worn at one handle, the canvas soft and a little darker than it started. Inside, your second shift, wrapped around a piece of soap. That's all. Everything else you have is on your body. You go out. The court is the full shock of outside. After the room, which is warm with 8 bodies and their collective exhalations, even the worst nights in the room have a certain warmth, the unavoidable animal warmth of people sharing space. The court is just cold. There is no other word for a November court in Whitechapel at 4:30 in the morning. The cold is flat and total and entirely indifferent to your opinion of it. The court is about 15 feet wide and opens onto Flower and Dean Street at one end. On both sides, the buildings rear up, 5 and 6 stories, the upper floors leaning toward each other the way old buildings do in rookeries, the way they seem to have reached toward the light and tilted, leaving the court below in a permanent state of partial darkness. At the far end, the privy. You don't use the privy this morning. You can smell it from here clearly enough to know there is a state of affairs in there that you'd rather not examine before you've had more of the day in you. You cross the court quickly, past the dust heap in the corner, past the water that has pooled around the drain since last week's rain and is developing a skin on its surface, past the cat that lives in the court and considers itself entirely separate from human concerns. The cat watches you cross with the particular quality of attention cats have, the complete attention that commits to nothing, out onto Flower and Dean Street. If you know anything about Victorian London, you might know the name of this street, though not for reasons that will be confirmed for another 4 years from this Tuesday morning in November 1884. What you know about it is what you've learned from living on it, that it runs east-west between Brick Lane and Commercial Street, that it is one of the densest streets in Whitechapel, which is saying something considerable, that the buildings on both sides house more people than any census has accurately counted, that it is a street of significant cosmopolitan variety, Irish families, Jewish families who came from Poland and from Russia, fleeing the pogroms, and who are changing the character of Whitechapel incrementally and unstoppably, English families from the country who came for work, various individuals whose origins are indeterminate and whose purposes are unclear. It is not yet fully awake at this hour. There are people moving, the early workers, the ones who go to docks or markets or factories or offices that want cleaning before their proper occupants arrive. They move through the dimness with the efficiency of people who have done this many times. The particular walk of early morning London, purposeful and slightly hunched, not looking at other people, because looking at other people at this hour usually means something has gone wrong for somebody. You join them. You become one of the moving shapes. The walk to Brick Lane takes you past things that your mind registers but doesn't linger on, because lingering costs something you can't afford at this hour. The family sleeping in the doorway of the chandler's shop, a man and woman and what looks like 2 children, bundled together under a piece of sacking. The woman's face is visible above the sacking, and she's looking directly at you as you pass, awake, just watching the street. You don't make eye contact. This is not cruelty. This is the mathematics of the street. Making eye contact is an exchange, and exchanges cost something, and there is nothing you have to give. A man is pushing a barrow heaped with something you can't immediately identify, something dark and indefinitely shaped. You step around him, and the smell from the barrow hits you as you pass. Fish, old fish, very old fish, fish on its way from having been fresh to becoming fish paste or manure, or something else entirely. He is taking it somewhere. Everything in this city goes somewhere. Nothing that can be sold or used or processed or turned into something else goes to waste. This is not environmental consciousness. This is poverty, which produces its own complete recycling economy from sheer necessity. The laundry is on Brick Lane, in the middle of a terrace of working premises, squeezed between a boot closer's workshop and a coffee shop that serves the workers coming in and out of the various industries along the lane. The coffee shop is called Peter's, and it has been there, you've been told, for 40 years, and the coffee it serves is weak and brown and sweet and costs a halfpenny, and on very good days you stop for one. This is not a very good day. Not yet. And you can't spend the halfpenny before you know what the day will bring, so you walk past with only the briefest acknowledgement to its existence. The warm light through the window, and the smell of the coffee coming under the door as you pass. Widow Tench's laundry is behind a painted wooden sign that says laundry in large letters, and Tench in smaller letters below. as if Mrs. Tench wanted to establish the function before the proprietorship. Through the door, the wave. The laundry has its own atmosphere, an entire personal climate, heat and moisture pressing at you as you open the door, the smell of wet linen and carbolic soap and coal smoke from the copper fire, and the sourness of work that's been building since the previous evening when the last of the women left, and it hasn't had the chance to fully air. In winter, the heat from the laundry is almost pleasant for the first few seconds. Then it is just the usual enveloping damp reality. There are 6 of them who work here. You and Annie and Joan and Meg and Mrs. Fletcher, who is the senior worker and acts as forewoman when Widow Tench isn't present, and Dolly, who is 16 and has only been here 2 months and still makes the faces when she lifts something heavy or puts her hands into the rinsing water for the 5th consecutive hour. You remember making those faces. You remember when putting your hands into the rinsing water still felt like something that deserved a response rather than just a thing that was happening to you. Annie is already here, shaking out sheets at the far end of the room, the sheets snapping like small thunderclaps in the enclosed space. Annie is 22 and has a husband who works in a tannery in Bermondsey and comes home smelling of the process, which is a smell that makes the laundry smell like flowers by comparison. You and Annie have a friendship built almost entirely on the shared experience of physical labour, the particular camaraderie that comes from doing hard, unpleasant work side by side for many hours, from knowing exactly what the other person's hands feel like at the end of a day and what it costs them. "Morning," she says, not stopping with the sheets. "Morning," you say, hanging your shawl on the peg by the door and rolling your sleeves to the elbow. This is how Tuesday begins. The laundry works in stages. The washing day is Monday. The dirty linen arrives from the household sorted and loaded into the coppers, boiled, agitated with the long wooden dolly, pulled out and put through the mangle, which is the work that takes the most out of your hands. The repetitive pressure of feeding the wet sheets through the rollers, the tension travelling up through your wrists and forearms. By Tuesday the washing is done and what remains is the finishing work, the starching and ironing and folding, the transformation of clean wet cloth into the stiff white perfection that the households expect. Tuesday is the irons. The irons are heated on the range, a row of flat irons lined up on the bars, heating to the temperature you test with a wetted finger, the finger's brief contact producing a hiss and a tiny bloom of steam, not long enough to burn if you're quick, and if you're quick matters because you're always quick by now. The movements so ingrained they don't require attention. The finger to the iron, the hiss, the judgment, the iron off the bar and onto the collar of the shirt, the pressure, the glide, the small decisions about grain and seam, and how much pressure for the thickness of this particular cloth. There is quality to ironing. Once you know how, that is not entirely unpleasant. The focus it requires is a specific kind of focus, narrow and physical, the attention of the hands and eyes working together, and while you're doing it you cannot really think about anything else, which is its own kind of relief from the stone in your chest, the 10-pence margin, the worn-through heel, the ongoing arithmetic. For the duration of the iron's pass across the cloth, you are just this pressure, and this heat, and this small becoming right of the wrinkled linen. But your hands by mid-morning on a Tuesday are the full statement of what laundry work does to hands. The skin around the knuckles is tight and shiny, the cracks visible even without looking, the redness that begins at the wrist and goes to the fingertips. The third finger of your right hand has a callus from the mangle handle, that is now so established it feels like part of the finger, like a thing that grew there. At the end of the day, the index finger of your left hand will have a new small burn from where the iron touched it for a fraction too long. You will put it in your mouth automatically, the way you always do, the brief cold of your own saliva providing a moment's relief before the sting returns. Widow Tench comes in at 7. She's a small, square woman, dense and purposeful. Widowed 11 years ago when Mr. Tench, who worked in a glue factory, died of something that the death certificate called fever, and that most people assumed was related to the glue factory. She took over the laundry with £20 borrowed from her brother, and has run it since with the focused energy of someone who knows exactly what failure would mean. She is not an unkind employer by the standards of the trade. She does not dock wages for minor infractions. She doesn't shout much, mostly. She pays at the end of the week without trying to find reasons why it should be less. But she watches. She has the quality of attention that comes from years of managing a small enterprise that cannot afford slack. The constant low-level supervision of someone for whom every wasted motion and every misfolded collar is a fraction of a penny she hasn't earned. She moves through the laundry the way a ship's captain moves on a deck, touching things, assessing the occasional word, the small adjustment of something done correctly but not perfectly. "That collar," she says, stopping behind you, not unkindly. You look at the collar. You see what she means. A slight waviness at the turn, the kind that comes from an iron temperature that's dropped a fraction. You take the iron back to the bar, wait, test, return. "Better," she says, and moves on. By 10 o'clock your back has added its own message to the communication your hands have been sending since dawn. The standing posture required for ironing, the slight forward lean, the way the movement of the iron pushes the shoulder and pulls the lower back, has been sending a continuous signal up your spine for 6 hours now. You shift your weight. You roll your neck once, carefully feeling the protest of the muscles there. You think, 4 more hours, 4 more, and then the bread in the middle of the day, the 10 minutes where you sit on the bench in the alley behind the laundry and eat whatever you've brought and don't have to stand. Dolly drops an iron. The sound of it hitting the stone floor is enormous in the enclosed space. A clanging that makes everyone flinch and then go still. The iron rolls, trailing a scorch mark on the floor. Dolly stands with her burned hand clenched against her chest, her eyes filling. "All right," says Annie, already moving, picking up the iron by the insulated handle, setting it back on the bar. "All right, Dolly, let's see." She takes Dolly's hand, examines it. The burn is minor, a redness across 2 fingers. Mrs. Fletcher has appeared from the other end of the room with the small tin of lard that lives on the shelf for exactly this purpose, the tin that gets replenished monthly. The thin grease applied to burns with the matter-of-fact efficiency of people who consider burns an occupational condition rather than an incident. Widow Tench watches from the doorway. She doesn't say anything immediately. She assesses the burn, the tears on Dolly's face, the disruption to the workflow. 5 minutes, she says, then back to it. She's not being cruel. She's being the person who has to keep this operating, who has to balance Dolly's burned fingers against the households waiting for their linen, against the 6pence Dolly earns per day, and what that 6pence cost the enterprise. You understand this perfectly, and you still hate it slightly. The 5 minutes, the matter-of-fact precision of the mercy. Dolly wipes her face with her unburned hand. She goes back to the iron. She does not drop another one for the rest of the day. The middle of the day comes with the small reprieve. You eat your bread in the alley, sitting on the step. The bread is the same bread as this morning's. Just the other half of yesterday's loaf. Slightly less stale because you've been carrying it in the warmth of your bag all morning. Annie sits beside you, eating something wrapped in newspaper, a piece of pie from the cook shop on the corner, the pastry a little grey, the filling indeterminate but hot. The steam from it rises in the cold air. You watch the steam. Michael got 3 days this week, Annie says. Dock work. That's good. It's something, she eats. Our landlord's put the rent up 6pence. When? December 1st. You do the arithmetic with her because you understand what the arithmetic looks like from inside it. The 6pence that doesn't exist as a discrete amount, but only as one more subtraction from the total that keeps trying to resolve into something insufficient. That's... I know, she says. You don't finish the sentence. You don't need to. She knows what it is. You know what it is. It is the stone getting slightly heavier. It is the margin shrinking. It is the winter coming, and the coal prices going up. And now 6pence on top of everything. And somewhere on the other side of all of it, the workhouse, which is the answer that nobody wants to arrive at. The answer that waits at the end of every arithmetic that fails. Maybe the factory, you say. Annie's husband has been thinking about taking work at a sugar refinery in Stepney. Cleaner work than the tannery, slightly better pay. But the shift pattern is different and the walk is farther. Maybe, she says. He doesn't want to leave the tannery. He knows people there. You know what she means. Knowing people is its own kind of currency in this economy. The men who can be trusted in a reference, who'll speak for you when a foreman asks, who know you're reliable before you've proved it at the new place. Leaving that behind means starting again from nothing, from the casual day hire, from the dock gates at 6 in the morning hoping to be selected. You eat your bread. The afternoon unspools. 3 o'clock and the light through the laundry's high windows is already going amber, the particular amber of a November afternoon in London, where the day never fully achieves its potential and begins its retreat before it's properly started. The irons have to be worked faster now, the heat held, the judgment sharper because the light is worse, and tired eyes make different mistakes than fresh ones. At 4:30, Widow Tench does the thing she does at 4:30 on good days, which is to allow the last of the pressing work to be finished without starting the next set. On bad days there is no such allowance. Today is middling, not a bad day, not a good one, the ordinary Tuesday that it set out to be. She waves a hand at the remaining work. Finish what's in hand, she says. Leave the rest for tomorrow. By 5 you're out of the laundry, your shawl pulled tight, your hands burning cold, the canvas bag over your shoulder. The Tuesday that started before light is ending in full dark. Brick Lane is alive with the evening crowd, the workers coming off shifts and going to the cook shops, the market stalls closing up, the barrows being pushed home. You should go back to the room. You should go directly back to the room and save the halfpenny you'd spend anywhere else. But first, the cook shop on the corner has a piece of sweet pudding in the window, the daily special written in chalk on the board. Suit pudding and broth. 1 penny farthing. It is steaming from the pot behind the window, a dense, comforting steam, and the smell of it, the thick, starchy, savoury smell, does something to your stomach that overrides the arithmetic. You buy it. You eat it standing up at the counter, not sitting, because sitting cost extra. The penny farthing is for takeaway. The chair is for the tuppence option. You stand and eat the sweet pudding from a chipped bowl with a tin spoon, the pudding dense and hot and deeply satisfying in the specific way that simple food is when you're genuinely hungry. Not peckish, but properly hungry. The hunger that comes from 6 hours of physical work on half a loaf of stale bread. The broth is thin, but it's hot, and it has some kind of onion in it, and you drink the last of it from the bowl without apology. You hand back the bowl. You go out into the dark of Brick Lane. On the way back along Flower and Dean Street, you pass the chandler's shop, which is also the room's informal financial institution. This is where you buy things on credit, on the tick, when the week has gone wrong and the sixpence won't stretch to the end of it. A tin of condensed milk for the baby. A piece of candle when the room supply runs low. It is written in a book. It has to be paid back, and the price it charges for being paid back later rather than now is not posted anywhere, but is built into the price of everything. A hidden interest rate expressed in slightly higher prices than the market rate. The premium for the flexibility of not having to have the money right now. You owe the chandler fourpence from last month. You have been paying it off twopence at a time. This does not feel like progress because it isn't quite. It's management. It's the maintenance of a relationship you might need again next week. The chandler knows this too. You don't stop at the chandler's. Tonight you have the fourpence from the floorboard and the tenpence margin, and the specific calculus of this week is not in crisis. Tonight, back to the building, the outer door, the hallway that smells of the entire building's accumulated domestic history, the cooking and the washing and the lives compressed into it. Mrs. Hannigan's curtain is drawn across her cupboard, but there is light behind it. A thin line at the bottom, and you can hear the children, a low exchange of voices, something being negotiated. You go up the stairs, which creak on the 3rd step and the 7th step and the 11th. A creak system you've internalized so thoroughly that you skip those steps automatically, your body making the adjustment before your mind has noticed. The room. The room in the evening is different from the room in the morning. The morning room is empty, mostly dim and still with the vacancy of people who have already gone out. The evening room is full of people and their day, the day they've each had separately in various parts of this city, brought back with them like something carried home on their clothes. Bridget is feeding Patrick at the breast, seated on the edge of the rope bedstead, her back to the room, doing it with the total matter-of-fact privacy of a woman who has no actual privacy and has stopped attempting it. Nora is on the floor beside her with her slate, writing something, her tongue pressed to her lip in concentration. The candle stub on the mantelpiece is lit, and she is leaning into its light. Mr. Crane is in his corner, his tools spread on a piece of cloth on the floor in front of him, running a cloth over one of the chisels. He does this in the evening sometimes, the maintenance of the tools, not because they necessarily need it, but because it gives him something to do with his hands that is his own skill, his own knowledge, his own domain of competence in a day that may otherwise have offered him nothing much to be competent about. Michael Faherty is not back yet. There is no particular anxiety in the room about this. Michael is not back by 6 sometimes, by 7 sometimes. The dock work running long on a good day, the walk from the docks taking time. His absence is just an absence, a vacancy in the room's count of people, noted and not worried over. Ellen is sitting on her portion of the floor pallet, her back against the wall, doing nothing. Just sitting. This is unusual for Ellen, who is almost always doing something. The busyness that keeps the room between her and whatever she's keeping the room between her and. But tonight she's just sitting, her arms around her knees, looking at something in the middle distance that isn't actually there. You put down your canvas bag on your portion of the pallet. You take off your boots, the left boot, the heel. The release of the pressure on the worn leather is immediately apparent, a structural relief that travels up from the boot to the ankle to the leg, the body's acknowledgement that it has been managing something uncomfortable all day. Mrs. Polly appears. She comes in from wherever she's been this evening, moving efficiently across the room to her corner of the rope bedstead, unwrapping a small parcel of something as she goes. You catch the smell, bread, and a small piece of cheese, the white crumbly kind from the dairy on Commercial Street. She sits and eats with the brisk purposefulness she brings to everything, not performing enjoyment, not performing endurance, just eating. "How was it?" she asks, and you understand the question is directed at you, her way of acknowledging the day you've had without requiring elaboration. "Ordinary, you say?" She nods. Ordinary is the best possible answer. Ordinary means nothing went wrong. Ordinary means the tenpence margin has survived one more day intact. Tommy comes in at 6:30 with his coat very dirty and a small cut on his chin that he's dealt with by pressing a piece of cloth to it, and which has mostly stopped bleeding. He sees your look. "Cart horse," he says. "Wasn't my fault." You wait. "I was collecting rags from the mews behind Sandy's Row, and the horse took a dislike to the sack, and I wasn't where I should have been." He says this with the tone of someone delivering a factual report rather than an account that requires sympathy. He sits down and pulls his coat off and examines the cut in the limited light available, by bringing it toward the candle on the mantelpiece, which mostly illuminates the ceiling above rather than anything at a useful angle. "Let me," says Ellen. She's already standing. She goes to the canvas bag you know she keeps under her portion of the pallet, and produces a small roll of cloth, the impromptu first aid of people who live in circumstances where professional medical attention is not a standard response to a cut on the chin. She examines Tommy's face with a practiced efficiency, cleaning the cut with a corner of damp cloth, pressing. Tommy submits to this without protest and without looking at her, staring at the ceiling with the specific male dignity of someone pretending that having his face tended to is not happening. "You need to be more careful," she says. "I know," he says. This is the longest exchange you've ever heard between them. Michael Faherty comes in at 7, tired in the specific way of dock work, the large muscles of his back and shoulders registering it in how he moves through the doorway. He sits on the edge of the rope bedstead, and Bridget looks at him with a question that requires no words, and he holds up 3 fingers, meaning 3 shillings for the day, and she gives a small nod that means she's done the arithmetic and it's sufficient for now. Nora shows him her slate. He looks at what she's written, and his face does something careful and pleased. He can read a little. Bridget reads better than he does, learned from the nuns in Mayo. Nora reads better than both of them already, and the arithmetic of this fact, what it means, what doors it might open or might not, depending on what the city offers a girl from a family living in a room like this, is something that you think Michael turns over in his mind in his quiet way. He touches the top of Nora's head briefly, a light touch, and hands back the slate. The evening in the room has its own texture, different from morning, different from day. It is the texture of people trying to find their portion of quiet within the shared space, the negotiations of tiredness and need and proximity. Mrs. Polly makes her tea on the small spirit lamp that is her own private possession, and which she allows nobody else to use but which she sometimes shares the product of. A mug of tea offered without comment to whoever is sitting nearest and looks like they need it. Tonight she offers it to Ellen, who takes it without saying thank you, and Mrs. Polly doesn't require the thanks. There is conversation, low and intermittent, the kind that fits between the other sounds of the room. Mr. Crane's occasional cough, Patrick's small noises, the sounds from the room below where someone is having a disagreement about something involving a door being closed harder than necessary. You sit on your portion of the pallet and wrap your hands in the strips of old linen you keep for this purpose, the nightly first aid, the soft binding around the worst of the cracks. Tommy eats something from his pocket, a piece of bread, and you see him break a piece of it and put it on the floor near Nora's reach without looking at her. She takes it without looking at him. This is the room's economy of small gestures, the things that get passed along without being named, the piece of bread, the candle extended past when you'd intended to extinguish it because someone is still trying to see, the corner of the blanket pulled over someone else's feet. None of it is discussed. None of it is acknowledged. It is just the way the room manages the gap between what each person has and what each person needs. A continuous redistribution so small and so quiet that it barely seems like anything at all, and is in fact the thing that keeps everyone in it alive. At 9 Mr. Fitch comes. He comes every Tuesday and Friday, which are his collection days for this building, and the 4 others he owns on adjacent streets. He's a large man, not fat but large, with the specific density of someone who grew up doing physical work and has spent the subsequent decades in a profession that requires only his presence and his ledger. He wears a good coat. His boots are sound. He has the manner of someone who is entirely comfortable with the relationship between himself and the people he collects from, a comfort that requires not thinking too carefully about that relationship from their side. You hear him on the stairs before he gets to your floor. You know his tread by now, heavy, unhurried, the deliberate pace of someone who is owed things and knows it. He knocks once, doesn't wait for an answer, opens the door. "Evening," he says. The room arranges itself around his arrival. Mrs. Polly produces her 2 shillings and 3 pence from wherever she keeps it. Coins counted out already. Ready. She has never in the time you've been here been anything other than ready. This seems like the most important thing she does. Michael produces his contribution from the inside pocket of his coat. Ellen produces hers from the small box under her portion of the pallet. You produce yours from the fold in your dress pocket, the exact 2 shillings and 3 pence, warm from being against your body all day. Mr. Fitch takes each payment in turn, marks his ledger with a pencil stub, says nothing beyond the smallest nods of acknowledgement. He gets to Tommy. Tommy produces 1 shilling and 6pence. "You're 3 short," says Mr. Fitch. "I know," says Tommy. "I'll have it Friday." The room goes quiet in a specific way, the quiet of people who are pretending not to be listening. Mr. Fitch looks at Tommy for a moment. Tommy looks back at him with the steady, slightly exhausted gaze of someone who's had this conversation before and is prepared to have it again. 3 pennies, says Mr. Fitch. Friday. Friday, says Tommy. Mr. Fitch writes something in his ledger and moves on to Mr. Crane. The tension in the room dissipates slowly. You breathe out. You hadn't noticed you'd stopped breathing. 3 pennies. This is not a crisis. 3 pennies by Friday is a crisis that Tommy has managed before and will manage again. But the moment of it, the stopping of the room, the ledger and the pencil, Mr. Fitch's particular brand of patience that is not kindness, but is also not its opposite, just the cold arithmetic of property. That moment had its weight. It always does. This is the Tuesday tension, the Tuesday ritual. Someone is always, Somewhere in the calculation of this room, 3 pennies short. This week, it's Tommy. 2 weeks ago, it was you. A miscalculation about the cost of coal that left you 4pence short and required a brief and undignified borrowing from Ellen. Paid back the next Friday. No interest, no comment. Before you arrived, it was presumably someone else. The room sustains itself on this, on the continuous small management of who has it and who doesn't, and who can cover the gap until the balance shifts again, on Mrs. Polly always ready, on Ellen's small box of carefully managed coins, on the daily arithmetic of survival that everyone in this room has been doing for so long, it is no longer calculation, but instinct. Mr. Fitch finishes his rounds. He closes his ledger. He nods at the room generally, a nod that acknowledges you as a collective, and goes out. His footsteps descend the stairs. You hear the knock on the door below, the same sound, the same interval, the same Tuesday. After he goes, the room exhales properly. 3 pennies, Mrs. Polly says to Tommy. It is not a question or a reproach. It is more like a notation. Cart horse, says Tommy. Mrs. Polly looks at the cut on his chin and does not ask. See me before Friday, she says. Tommy nods. That's that. Later that night, when the candle is out and the room has found its sleeping configuration, you lie in your portion of the floor pallet and listen to the building settle around you. The sounds of 8 people in various stages of sleep are a geography you know now, a landscape of breath and small movement. Bridget Faherty's steady breathing, Mr. Crane's cough, always worst at night, deeper in the chest, the wet note in it that wasn't there 2 months ago. Patrick in a small space on the bedstead between his parents, making no sound at all, the total sleep of an 18-month-old who has burned every calorie available. The sounds from outside come in layers too. The street noise has dropped from its daytime register to the nighttime one. Lower and more intermittent. The occasional shout, the rattle of a cart in the distance, the dog that lives in the court 2 doors down beginning its nightly monologue. Somewhere not far, a baby crying with the persistent, repetitive grief of a baby who's been crying for a long time and is not done yet. You think about your mother. You do this sometimes at night, not every night, but sometimes. The Somerset farmhouse with its kitchen fire and its smell of bread and animal warmth. Your mother's hands, the particular calluses on her palms from years of dairy work. Her face, which you can still see clearly when you try, which you try not to do too often because the clarity of it, so complete and so inaccessible, is its own kind of ache. She wanted better for you. She believed in London the way people who've never been to London believe in it, as a place where better was possible, as a place where the stone in your chest, if you had one there, might dissolve under the weight of the possibilities available. You haven't written in 3 weeks. The pen and ink cost money. The paper cost money. The letter itself cost a halfpenny to send, which is not nothing. And there is the further complication that writing the letter involves accounting for where you are and what your days look like, which means either lying about the room and the stone and the 10pence margin, or telling the truth about them. And you don't want to lie and you don't want to tell the truth, and so the letter doesn't get written. She doesn't know about the room. She knows you have a lodging in Whitechapel and work at a laundry and are managing. She knows these things because you wrote them in September, in the brief hopeful period when managing felt accurate and temporary, and the room felt like a stage rather than a destination. In November, it feels less like a stage. In November, it feels like what it is. You wrap your hands tighter in their strips of linen and close your eyes. On Wednesday mornings, the laundry receives the second delivery of the week, the households whose collection day is Tuesday, the sheets and shirts and tablecloths arriving in bundles tied with cord. Your job on Wednesday mornings is sorting, the inspection and categorization of the incoming laundry, which requires a specific attention. You have to assess the state of each item before it goes into the copper, because the state of it determines what goes in first and at what temperature and for how long. And if you get this wrong in either direction, you'll either not clean it or damage it, and either outcome is the kind of thing Widow Tench notices. But Wednesday is also the day that has one quality that no other day of the week has, which is that in the middle of the morning, while the first boil is running and there's a brief operational pause before the mangle work begins, Widow Tench goes to do her books in the small office at the back, and the 6 women in the laundry have approximately 20 minutes of unsupervised time. This is when the conversation happens. The real conversation. The kind that doesn't get abbreviated by the proximity of someone in authority. You talk about your lives, about the rooms and the people in them and the cost of coal and the landlords and the husbands and the children and the jobs you had before this one and the jobs you might have instead. You talk about the neighbourhood, about who has moved in and who has moved out, about the family on Cable Street whose eldest daughter has got work as a lady's maid and now sometimes comes home on Sundays wearing a dress that cost more than any of you will earn in a month. About the woman on Hanbury Street who runs a coffee house that isn't a coffee house, the way you say that with a careful plainness, isn't a coffee house, which everyone understands. About the German baker whose bread is cheaper than the English baker's and twice as good, and whether you have feelings about patronising a German baker, and whether those feelings affect your purchasing decisions. Annie talks about her husband's lungs, the tannery work, the fact that the smoke from the tanning pits has been getting into his chest the same way that the laundry steam gets into yours, except that tanning smoke has things in it that the doctor on Whitechapel Road has warned about, substances that the process requires, lime and tannic acid, and the smell that comes off the hides, and the question of whether you tell a man to leave the work that feeds the family because of what the work is doing to his lungs, when the alternative is the dock gates at 6 a.m. with all the uncertainty that comes with that. Meg talks about her mother, who lives in Bethnal Green, and who has been ill since October. Ill in the chronic, grinding way of old women in cold rooms, who haven't had quite enough food for quite a long time. The kind of ill that isn't a crisis that will resolve but a slow diminishment. Meg goes every Sunday. She takes food and sits with her mother and pretends, she says, to her mother and perhaps to herself that things are all right. She doesn't need to know they're not, Meg says, which is a sentence you understand completely. Joan doesn't talk much during these intervals. She listens. She has a quality of careful listening that suggests she's keeping things she's heard here for future reference, though to what purpose you can't imagine, and she seems entirely without malice, just absorbed, the way some people are absorbed by the particular details of other people's lives. Dolly talks about everything, in the rushing, unstoppable way of 16-year-olds who have recently discovered that life is more complicated than they thought, and are processing this by narrating it at speed. She's currently conducting a correspondence with a boy who works at a boot factory in Stepney. This correspondence is managed through a go-between, the younger sister of a woman who works at the boot factory, a chain of communication of considerable geographical complexity, for a distance of less than a mile. She reads pieces of the letters out during the Wednesday interval, and everyone listens, and there are opinions offered, and Dolly accepts them with the selective attention of someone who will do what she was going to do regardless. You talk about Tommy. Not much, just a sentence. that he was 3 short, and Mrs. Polly's covering it. There's a collective acknowledgement. They know Tommy, or they know the type of Tommy, the Whitechapel boy on the edge of things, the one who might tip towards something or away from it depending on variables you can't see. They don't say this aloud. Nobody says it aloud. They just understand it. "He's a good boy," says Annie, which is not a statement about Tommy in particular, so much as a statement about the category of person who might or might not make it. A hopeful assertion directed more at the universe than at anyone specific. Widow Tench comes back from her books at 10:20 precisely, because she always comes back at 10:20 precisely, and the conversation ends as it always ends, with a mutual and slightly guilty resumption of the work, that the interval never entirely paused. You go back to the sheets. Thursday. Thursday is the day you go to the pawnbroker. You don't pawn things every week. You don't have enough things to pawn every week for one thing, and for another the pawnbroker's is a trap of its own, the slow drain of small objects going in and not always coming out, because redeeming something costs the original price plus the interest, and if you don't redeem it the thing is gone and you have a debt of a different kind, the kind that costs dignity more than money. But every few weeks, when the arithmetic requires it, you take something. This week it is the earrings. They belong to your aunt who gave them to you the summer before you came to London. Small brass drops, not valuable but a little pretty, and you've been wearing them on Sundays when you put on your good dress, the one you keep for the one day a week that isn't the grey wool. The day you try to remind yourself and anybody who sees you that you are a person with some claim on the ordinary life of someone who owns a good dress and wears earrings on Sunday. But the heel on the left boot cannot wait any longer. The leather has gone through entirely now, and the wet comes directly in, and wet feet lead to sores, and sores lead to infection, and infection. In a laundry worker's feet leads to exactly the kind of crisis that the tenpence margin does not exist to absorb. The heel costs 10 pence, the earrings will give you 8 pence. With the 4pence already saved, you'll have enough for the cobbler with 2 pence left. The pawnbroker is in a narrow shop front on Wentworth Street, run by a man named Mr. Levy, who has a business that is part commercial enterprise and part community infrastructure, the place where half the neighbourhood's small valuables reside during the weeks when the neighbourhood needs the cash more than the valuables. He's a small, precise man with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead that he lowers into position when he examines things, a gesture so practised it's become involuntary, the glasses coming down the moment anything is placed on the counter. You put the earrings on the counter. He examines them. He puts them on his small scale. He looks at them again. 8 pence, he says. They're worth more than that, you say. You know they're not. You know they're not worth more than that. But this is the negotiation. The one form of commerce in your life that isn't the laundry's fixed terms, and isn't the cookshop's posted prices, the one place where you have a position. He looks at you over the glasses. 8 pence, he says again kindly, not unkindly, just 8 pence. This is the price. It is a fair price for what they are, a fair price in the terms of this transaction, and everyone here understands that. You take the 8 pence. The ticket he gives you is a small piece of cardboard, numbered. The number corresponding to the entry in his ledger. Brass earrings, 1 pair, 8D, November 14th, 1884. 3 months to redeem at 8 pence plus 1 penny interest. After 3 months they're sold. You put the ticket in your dress pocket next to the coins. At the cobbler's on Wentworth Street, the man takes the boot from you, turns it over, examines the heel, makes the sound that cobblers make when examining boots that needed attention some time ago and haven't received it. He quotes tenpence. You produce the exact tenpence, 4 pennies of which came from the earrings. He nails a new piece of leather to the heel, and you sit on the bench by his door for 15 minutes while he does it, which is 15 minutes of sitting that you haven't had since the middle of the day at the laundry, and which your back acknowledges with a brief unclenching. You put the boot back on. The difference is immediate. The solid contact of the heel on the ground, the balance properly restored, the small but significant disappearance of the compensating lean to the right that you've been making for 6 weeks. You walk out of the cobbler's shop and down Wentworth Street, and your walk is different. Just slightly. Just the amount of difference one repaired heel makes, which is more than you'd think. This is the thing about the economics of this life that the comfortable world doesn't quite grasp. The cost of not being able to afford repairs. The wet that comes through the boot because you can't pay for the heel, and the infection that could follow, and the day's work lost to the infection, and the day's wages lost and the margin shrinking. The dress seam that goes unrepaired because thread costs money, until it gives entirely at a moment that costs more than the thread would have. The deferred costs that accumulate in the body and in the object and in the small running debts at the chandler's, until they resolve into a crisis that is larger and more expensive than the maintenance would have been. This is what poverty costs. Not just the obvious thing, not just the not having enough. The cost of not being able to fix things before they break. On Thursday afternoon, on the way back from the cobbler, you pass a street you don't usually take, cutting through behind the market, and you hear music. It is coming from a building you don't immediately recognise. A hall with a sign you have to get closer to read, the Whitechapel, lending library and reading room. Free admission. You are welcome. The music is a piano. Someone playing something you don't know the name of, but which has a quality that's hard to describe. A kind of steadiness. Not cheerful exactly, but solid. The music equivalent of a good floor under your feet. You stop. You don't know why you stop. You've walked past 100 buildings today without stopping. But this one, the door is open a few inches and the music comes through it, and also the smell of books, which is a smell you know from childhood, from the farmer's wife who had books in her parlour, and who sometimes left the parlour door open and you'd smell it from the passage. That particular smell of paper and binding and time. You go in. The room is smaller than it looked from outside, maybe 30 feet long, with shelves along both walls and a table in the middle with newspapers on it and several chairs, half of which are occupied. An older man in a coat reading a newspaper. 2 younger men bent over something on the table together, talking in low voices. A woman with a child on her lap, the child asleep, the woman reading with the careful concentration of someone who knows the child might wake at any moment. And at the piano, which is against the far wall, a boy of about 15 playing. The same piece, over and over, not exactly the same each time, varying it slightly, learning it. The slight stumbles and corrections of someone in the process of acquiring something. The librarian, a thin man with ink on his fingers, looks up at you from behind a small desk. "Help you?" he says. "I was just—" You gesture vaguely. "You're welcome to sit," he says. "Read if you like. Newspapers are on the table. We have books to borrow if you want to register." "I can borrow them?" "For 2 weeks. Just give your address. No cost." You stand for a moment in the middle of the room and the piano continues and the light through the windows is the thin amber of late afternoon and the man goes back to his newspaper, and the woman with the sleeping child turns a page, and you sit down. You're there for an hour. You don't read anything in particular. You look at the newspaper, which is 2 days old. The headlines passing through you without fully landing. You watch the boy at the piano. You watch the woman with the child who doesn't wake until 5 minutes before you leave, and then cries briefly and looks around with the bewildered alarm of someone who has woken somewhere other than expected. And his mother says something quiet to him, and he settles. Before you leave, you register your address, Flower and Dean Street, and you take a book from the shelf. The librarian helps you find one. A novel, he says, straightforward, not difficult. Here, try this. Mrs. Gaskell, North and South, about a woman who goes from the country to an industrial city and finds it brutal, and finds it beautiful, and has to learn to carry both of those things. You put it in your canvas bag against the shift and the soap, and you go out. On the way back to the room, you feel something that takes you a moment to identify, because it's been a while since you felt it. Something lighter. Not the stone gone. The stone is still there, but something alongside it. Something that counterweights it by a small amount. The book in the bag. The librarian who said you are welcome. The piano playing a thing it was learning. You walk back along Flower and Dean Street as the last light goes out of the sky. But the thing about November in Whitechapel is that it doesn't hold on to its lighter moments very long. The next morning is Friday, which is when Mr. Fitch comes again, and which is also, as it turns out, the morning that the room discovers something it has been not noticing for 2 weeks. You wake before light, as usual. The room, the cold floor, the roll of waking bodies. And then you hear it more clearly than you've heard it before, because it's closer, because it's in the room rather than filtering through from below. Mr. Crane's cough. It is worse. Not incrementally worse, the way it has been getting worse since October. The slow deterioration of a man's lungs through autumn. This is different. This is the quality of the cough that even the room, which has learned to absorb the cougher's background, wakes to. Mr. Crane is sitting up on the rope bedstead, hunched forward over his knees, coughing with a sound that has become wet in a way it wasn't last week, a depth to it, a gurgling resonance that doesn't belong. Mrs. Polly is already upright. She is beside him. She has her hand on his back, not moving, just there, just the weight of her hand between his shoulder blades. She looks at you over his bent head. Her face does what it almost never does. It shows what it's thinking. What it's thinking is, this is not all right. The room arranges itself around this slowly as people wake. Michael Faherty sitting up, taking in the sound, his face going still with the attention of someone who grew up with this sound, who knows in his bones what it means. Bridget pulling Patrick closer without waking. Tommy on the rope bedstead's edge watching Mr. Crane with the expression of someone trying to decide something. Nora from the floor pallet says in a clear small voice, "Is he going to hospital?" Nobody answers her. This is the question that has the stone in it. The question that the room has been not asking for 2 weeks. The hospital. The Whitechapel infirmary. Which takes the poor. Which is where you go when you have no choice. It is not a place you go voluntarily. The way a middle-class person goes to a doctor's office. The way the comfortable world accesses medicine. You go when the alternative is death, and then you go, and sometimes you come out, and sometimes you don't, and the record of who came out and who didn't from the Whitechapel Infirmary in 1884 is a record that would make a person thoughtful. Mr. Crane straightens up from the cough. His face, when he lifts it, is grey. in a way that is not the room's ambient greyness, the greyness of insufficient light and damp plaster, but his own, something internal, a quality of face that comes from somewhere very deep. His eyes, though, his eyes are perfectly clear, perfectly himself, the eyes of a man who knows exactly what is happening. "I'll be fine," he says. "You'll be seen to," says Mrs. Polly, and her voice has a quality that closes the discussion. He does not go to work that day. He sits on the rope bedstead with a piece of cloth against his mouth and his tools in their roll on the floor beside him, and he does not say much, and Mrs. Polly stays in the room rather than going to her own work, which tells you more about what she thinks about the situation than any words would. You go to the laundry with the book in your bag. You think about Mr. Crane's face for most of the morning. You feed sheets into the mangle, and you think about the clarity of his eyes and the specific grey of his skin and the sound of the cough that has a new texture this week, and the tools in the canvas roll, and how he keeps them, and the care of them, and what it means that a man keeps his tools that carefully when he can barely use them anymore. Annie sees something in your face. "Something wrong," she says. "The man in my room," you say. "His chest." She doesn't say anything for a moment. She takes the other end of the sheet from you and they come out of the mangle together, and she doesn't say, "I'm sorry." She doesn't say, "Will he be all right?" She says, "He's got somebody looking after him." Mrs. Polly, she nods. This is the whole comfort she offers, and the whole comfort that's available, and it is in its own way sufficient. The acknowledgement that the thing is happening and that someone is there. "Good," she says, and takes the sheet. "By midday, when you eat your bread on the step, you've made a decision about something. After work, you take a different route. Not back along Flower and Dean Street, but north along Brick Lane, and then along Bethnal Green Road, until you reach a building you've walked past a dozen times but never entered. The Salvation Army Barracks. The sign says, 'All are welcome. Help is here.' You go in because you know that the Salvation Army has a visiting service, volunteers who come to see sick people in their homes, who can sometimes arrange for medicines or a doctor's attention at reduced cost. You know this because Mrs. Hannigan from the cupboard under the stairs told you weeks ago, in the offhand way information passes through Flower and Dean Street, as gossip and survival tip simultaneously. The man at the desk is young, earnest, with the particular quality of conviction that the Salvation Army produces, not aggressive about it, but present, completely present, willing to help in a way that hasn't calculated the cost first. You tell him about Mr. Crane, the address, the cough, the state of it this morning. He writes it down. He says someone will call tomorrow. He says there's no charge. He says, "God bless you for asking." You don't say anything to that. You nod and go out. On the way back, you stop at the chandler's and buy a tin of condensed milk for twopence, because you can, because the cobbler cost less than expected, and there is room in the arithmetic today for it. The condensed milk goes into your bag beside the book. You carry it home. In the room, Mrs. Polly looks at the tin. She doesn't say anything, but when she makes Mr. Crane's tea that evening, she puts some in it, a small sweetening, and Mr. Crane holds the mug in both hands and drinks it with his eyes closed. You sit with the book after supper. The candle on the mantelpiece is lit. You read with it held close, the small print of the Gaskell novel, the woman arriving in the industrial north, the mills and the smoke and the people who live in and under and around them. The protagonist's shock at what industrial poverty looks like up close. Her gradual understanding that understanding it is not the same as being able to do anything about it. Nora Faherty has come to sit near you, not asking, just gradually appearing at the edge of your light. You hold the book out slightly so the light reaches her too. She doesn't say thank you. She reads over your shoulder for 10 minutes before her mother calls her to bed. You read until the candle stub gutters and dies. Saturday. Saturday is the day the room breathes differently. The laundry does not take work on Saturday afternoons. The morning is a half day, over by noon, and the afternoon is, in theory, yours. In theory, because the afternoon has its obligations too. The washing of your own things, the mending, the collection of water from the pump that is now 2 streets away, because the nearer pump has been declared impure by the sanitary inspector and closed until someone decides what to do about it. The 2-street walk for water with a heavy bucket is the difference between 20 minutes and 40, and you make it twice on Saturday, the bucket handle cutting into your palm with a persistence that leaves a mark. But there is also, on Saturday afternoons, the market. Petticoat Lane on Saturday is an event. You could call it a market in the way you could call Niagara a stream. The word is accurate but inadequate. It is a complete economy, a world, a compression of the entire material life of the neighbourhood into a single street, and the streets that branch from it, every surface and empty space occupied by things for sale, old clothes and new goods, and repaired objects and food and fabric and tools and tin pots and candles and ironmongery and leather and everything that can be extracted from the city's discard and made saleable again. You go because you need a new shift. The one you have is at the point of no return, the seams opening in multiple places, the fabric thin to transparency at the elbows. You've been managing it, the strategic folding and pinning that hides the worst of it, but it cannot last another month. The shifts are on a stall near the middle of the lane, heaped on a table and sorted roughly by size. You go through them the way you've learned to go through everything here. Quickly, your hands working faster than your eyes, feeling for the state of the seams, the quality of the fabric, the places that have been mended and the places that are about to need it. "That one's good," says the woman behind the stall. She's watching you with professional assessment. "How much?" "4pence." The shift you're holding has been worn before, clearly, and washed since, and is sound at the seams, and clean. 4pence is approximately right for what it is. You know the floor price on second-hand shifts on Petticoat Lane is about 3pence, and the ceiling is 5pence, and the woman has started at 4, which means she has a penny of movement in her, possibly 2 if you have the conversation. 3pence, you say, is worth 4pence, she says, and she's not wrong, strictly speaking. "I know it is," you say, "but I've got 3.5 for it." A pause. She looks at you. She looks at the shift. She looks at the state of your hands, which are the hands of someone who works in a laundry and knows exactly what a good shift needs to be made of. 3pence halfpenny, she says. "Done." You add the shift to the bag. You walk further along the lane. There is a stall selling apples, Cox's orange pippins from somewhere outside the city. Proper country apples, not the improbable spheres from the market on Commercial Street that have the shape of an apple and none of the taste. These are real apples, slightly uneven, slightly rosetted, with the smell that hits you before you reach the stall, the smell of orchards, of Somerset, of a specific autumn that your hands and your lungs remember even when your conscious mind is elsewhere. You buy 2 for a halfpenny. You eat one standing there, right at the stall, immediately, because you want to, and because the tenpence margin allows it today, and because the smell of the apple is home and you need a moment of it. The woman selling them sees your face and says nothing, just watches you eat the apple with the kind of attention that is also recognition, the recognition of someone who knows what it means when a person stops in front of a smell from a different life. You take the second apple back to the room for Nora Faherty. You don't tell anyone that's what it's for. You just put it on the shelf by the fireplace, next to the enamel mug, on top of Mrs. Polly's tea tin, because that's the only surface. And that evening Nora spots it and looks at you with a brief question in her face, and you nod, and she takes it and eats it with the same focused seriousness she brings to her slate. This is Saturday in the room. Sunday. The Salvation Army man comes on Sunday morning as promised. He is the same young man from the barracks, and he has a doctor with him, a volunteer, an older man with a bag who examines Mr. Crane in the room with Mrs. Polly in attendance, and everyone else tactfully occupying themselves on the other side of the room's small geography. You hear the examination not as words but as sounds. The doctor's low voice, Mrs. Polly's occasional response, Mr. Crane mostly silent except for the moments the doctor listens to his chest with the stethoscope, when the coughing that the instrument provokes fills the room completely. You fold the newspaper into careful shapes. Tommy stares at the ceiling. Nora reads her slate. Michael and Bridget Faherty have taken the children out into the court. When the doctor finishes, he speaks to Mrs. Polly for several minutes. Then she comes to where you're sitting and tells you what he said. Not all of it, but the essential things. That Mr. Crane has a serious condition of the lungs, that rest and warmth are the treatment that can be provided in the home, that there are medicines that might help with the cough and the breathing, that the doctor will leave a supply, that someone should keep him warm. The room does the arithmetic of this quietly. Warmth means coal. Coal costs money. Mr. Crane does not have the money for coal beyond his rent and his food. The mathematics of warming a man with bad lungs in November, in a room with one small grate and no insulation beyond the gap in the window stuffed with sacking, is a specific and insoluble problem if approached from the position of Mr. Crane's resources alone. It is not approached from the position of Mr. Crane's resources alone. Mrs. Polly puts a shilling on the mantelpiece shelf without comment. Ellen puts 3p beside it. You put 2p. Michael, coming back in from the court, sees the coins and adds his 4p, and the transaction is complete, and none of its terms are discussed. The coal comes from the merchant on Commercial Street on Monday morning. 2 shillings and 5p buys enough for a week if the fire is kept low, and the door kept closed. This is the room providing for one of its own. Not because anyone has discussed providing for one of its own as a principle, not because there is a formal arrangement. Because Mr. Crane is here and it is winter, and the room is, however improbably, however inadequately, however insufficient to the scale of what everyone in it actually needs, something that functions as a unit. You think about this on Sunday afternoon when you have walked out along Whitechapel Road just to walk, just to be in a slightly different quality of air than the room or the laundry provides. The Sunday streets in their slightly better clothes and their slightly slower pace. You pass the churches, the Sunday services letting out, the dressed-up poor and the simply dressed middle class and the occasional gentry in their carriages, the Sunday stratification of the city, everyone in the slot the week doesn't always assign them to. You pass a board school, closed on Sunday, its doors locked, its yard empty. You think about Nora's slate. You think about the board school on Brady Street. You think about the library, about the book in your bag, which you've been reading in snatches, 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, the woman from Hampshire arriving in the industrial north and finding it brutal and finding it beautiful. You stop on Whitechapel Road and look at the street. There is a public house, there is a coffee stall, there is a boy selling newspapers, the Sunday edition, holding one up as if the headline on it is a thing you might run toward. There is an old woman sitting on a doorstep with a pile of violets in her lap selling them, the violets still with the morning dew on them from wherever she gathered them. A detail so incongruous in this street that you stop to look at them. Real violets. The actual purple of them, the actual smell, clean and complicated and from somewhere entirely other than Whitechapel Road on a grey November Sunday. You buy a bunch for a halfpenny, you bring them back to the room and put them in the enamel mug with some water, and they sit on the mantelpiece beside the condensed milk tin and the bent nail and the emergency candle. And their smell, the clean complex smell of them, cuts through the room's accumulated atmosphere for half a day before they begin to close and droop. Mrs. Polly looks at them, and then looks at you with an expression that is, very briefly, something other than practical. "Thank you," she says. And then she goes back to her tea. This is the room at its fullest, the room at the most it can be. The violets and the coal fire and 8 people, and the smell of both Mr. Crane's cough medicine and Bridget Faherty's boiled potatoes from the spirit lamp, and the sound of Nora reading aloud to Patrick, who doesn't understand the words but watches her face with total attention, learning something about words even so. It is not good. Let me not say it is good, because it isn't. It is cramped and cold, even with the fire, and damp and expensive and contingent and always on the edge of something worse. The tenpence margin is still there, the stone is still there, the left boot has been repaired, but the dress still needs replacing, and the shift from Petticoat Lane is now in the weekly rotation, and the earrings are in Mr. Levy's drawer. But it is not nothing. It is, by some margin that you can't quite quantify, not nothing. The weeks move. November becomes December, which is its own specific ordeal. The cold settling into its permanent winter register, the temperature in the room that requires active management every evening, the fire decisions, how much coal tonight, how much to leave for tomorrow morning, the constant rationing of warmth. The window sacking lets in the wind now with a new insistence. Tommy ties additional cloth around the frame with a focus that suggests this is not his first winter making do with inadequate windows. He does not ask for thanks. He gets none, explicitly. He gets the fire kept burning later than usual that evening, which is a kind of thanks. Mr. Crane improves, incrementally with setbacks, the way improvement goes when the underlying condition is what his is, when the improvement is from the acute crisis rather than toward health, when what you are aiming at is manageable rather than resolved. But he sits up more. He eats better. The colour in his face improves slightly toward the less alarming end of the spectrum. He cleans his tools on a Sunday morning with an increased steadiness, the cloth moving over the chisel with something closer to his usual precision. The Salvation Army man comes back twice. He brings more medicine. He also brings, on the second visit, a small bundle of coal from the Army's winter charity distribution, which comes without commentary or condition, and which everyone in the room accepts without embarrassment, because by December the ability to be embarrassed by charity has been substantially eroded by the need for coal. The laundry is busier in December. The Christmas linens, the households who want their best table settings laundered for the holiday meals, the extra work that comes with the season. Widow Tench takes on 2 additional women for 4 weeks. Women who appear and disappear like seasonal weather. The casual labour of the laundry trade. The extra work means extra hours and extra pay. The December increment that you've been told about by Annie, who planned for it in her household arithmetic months ago. An extra 3 shillings over the 4 weeks of December. 3 shillings. 3 shillings is 3 weeks of coal at the careful rate. 3 shillings is the earrings redeemed from Mr. Levy. You redeem them on the Saturday before Christmas, handing over the 10pence redemption cost and receiving the brass drops back in their paper wrapping. And you put them straight on, standing in the middle of the pawnbrokers, while the other customers and Mr. Levy himself go about their business, just putting them in, feeling the small weight of them, the weight of a thing that was your aunt's and is yours and has survived. Christmas in the room. You have been in the room for Christmas now. A year ago, Christmas was in Somerset. Your mother's kitchen, the smell of the goose, the neighbours in and out, your cousin's children making the noise that children make when something exceptional is happening and they know it. You miss it with an acuteness that you try not to give too much room, because giving it room costs something, and the stone is already heavy enough. Christmas in the room is Mrs. Polly has baked. She has baked, using the communal use of the spirit lamp and a small flat tin, and whatever she spent on ingredients that she's been accumulating for weeks in the tin on the mantelpiece. Not the tea tin, a separate tin. Something she has not explained and nobody has asked about. She has baked something that is technically a pudding, dense with dried fruit and dark with something stronger than tea, and she cuts it into 8 pieces on Christmas morning and hands them around without ceremony. Bridget Fatty cries briefly, silently into Patrick's hair while eating her piece. Michael puts his hand on her knee. She stops crying and eats the rest of the pudding and says, "It's good, Mrs. Polly." Mrs. Polly says, "It should be. It took long enough." Tommy produces from his coat a small paper bag of boiled sweets in 4 colours. He puts them in the middle of the floor without attribution, and they are taken by everyone without attribution. A transaction that belongs to no one and everyone simultaneously. You have been in the room now for 14 months. You know the building sounds the way you know words. The particular creak that means someone is coming up to the 2nd floor. The specific sound the back window makes in east wind. The 2-tone drip of the broken pipe in the north wall, steady in wet weather and intermittent in dry. You know the court's population by their sounds, the family below by their cooking smells, Mrs. Hannigan by the particular rhythm of her children's voices, the couple on the top floor by their arguments, which are spectacular and frequent, and always resolve in the same register of exhaustion. You know this building. You know it the way you knew the farmhouse in Somerset, the way you know a place you've lived in for long enough that it has become the background against which everything else happens. January is hard. January is the month that the laundry work drops back to its ordinary level after December's increment. The 3 extra shillings are gone. The 10pence margin is back to its usual dimensions. The cold is consistent and requires consistent coal, and the price of coal has gone up slightly as it always does in the deepest part of winter. The merchant on Commercial Street explaining this with the factual calm of someone who has explained it every January for decades and does not feel it requires apology. And then on the 3rd Tuesday of January something happens to the stone in your chest. You come back from the laundry on a Tuesday evening, the ordinary Tuesday, Mr. Fitch's night, your rent ready in your pocket. You come up the stairs, step around the 3rd creak and the 7th creak, and the 11th, push open the door. Bridget Faherty is standing in the middle of the room, holding Patrick against her shoulder, and she's looking at something that you can't immediately see. Her face with an expression you haven't seen on her before. A kind of removed, careful attention, as if she is watching something from a distance and needs to see it clearly. You look where she's looking. Mr. Crane is on the floor near the grate. He is sitting. He hasn't fallen. He is sitting, deliberately it seems, against the wall near the grate, with his legs in front of him and his hands in his lap. He's looking at his tools, which are laid out in front of him in their usual arrangement on the cloth. He's looking at them with the same expression as Bridget, that careful, removed attention. Mrs. Polly is beside him. She has been beside him, you think, for some time. Her hand is on his shoulder. Tommy is sitting on the rope bedstead with his knees up, watching. Ellen is in her corner. Michael stands in the doorway to the court. He came from that direction and hasn't fully entered, his large frame filling it. Mr. Crane looks up when you come in. "Good evening," he says. His voice is different. Not worse in any single way you could identify, just slower, as if each word requires more effort than usual to locate and produce. "Good evening," you say. You put down your bag. You sit on the pallet. There is a silence in the room. Not the ordinary evening silence, but something deliberate. Something that the room is making together without deciding to. Even Patrick, who has been gurgling intermittently since you came in, is quiet. Even the building around you seems to have found a specific register. Mr. Crane reaches out and picks up one of the chisels. The small one, the mortise chisel, the one with the boxwood handle that has gone dark with years of use, polished to glass by the pressure of his palm. He turns it over once. He holds it for a moment. Then he sets it back down, very gently, exactly where it was. "When I was your age," he says, and he's not looking at you, he's looking at the tools. "I could work a piece of cherry wood for 6 hours and not need to think about anything except the wood." He's quiet for a moment. That's what it was, for a long time, just the wood. Nobody says anything. "The first thing I made on my own," he says, still the tools, still the slow voice, "was a box. Box for my mother to keep her sewing in. Dovetail joints. I was 17. The joints weren't right, actually. I could see that even then. I could feel it when I ran my finger across them. The slight gap. The place where the fit wasn't what it should have been." A pause. "She kept her sewing in it for 30 years. Mrs. Polly's hand on his shoulder doesn't move. "She kept everything in it," he says, whether it fit right or not. The room holds this, and then Mr. Crane does something extraordinary. He laughs. It's a brief laugh, brief enough that it doesn't become a cough, contained just within the moment. A genuine laugh at the image of the not quite right dovetail joints that held for 30 years. The laugh of someone who has looked at something and found in it both the failure and the sufficient of it at once. Ellen laughs too, very quietly, just the sound of air through her teeth that is nonetheless clearly a laugh. Michael, in the doorway, smiles. The first time you've seen him smile this week. This deep smile that changes his whole face. The stone in your chest shifts. Not gone. The stone doesn't go away, but it shifts, reorganizes, becomes, for a moment, the weight of something else. The weight of the room itself, its 8 people, the cough and the tools and the dovetail joints and Nora's slate and the violets that lasted half a day, and the apple you ate at the Petticoat Lane stall, and the earrings in Mr. Levy's drawer, and the earrings now back on your ears, and all of it, all the 14 months of it, The room that is terrible and the room that is home, and both of those things entirely true at the same time. Mrs. Polly makes tea. She puts condensed milk in everyone's mug, not just Mr. Crane's. It takes 2 tins. She doesn't comment on the cost. You think she's been saving the tins since you first brought one home. You think she's been planning for this evening without knowing what this evening would be. You think she does this constantly, Mrs. Polly. The invisible preparation for eventualities, the continuous low-level provision for the room's possible needs. The woman who has lived on this street for 40 years and knows exactly what a room of people sometimes needs. Bridget's white collar work moves in the candlelight. Tommy's boots are off, his feet toward the small warmth of the grate. Mr. Crane has the chisel in his lap. Patrick is asleep against Bridget's shoulder, his mouth slightly open, his face completely without concern. The total confidence of very young sleep. You have the book from the library in your bag. You haven't finished it yet. You take it out, hold it in the candlelight. You read a page. The woman from Hampshire in the industrial north, learning that the brutal place and the beautiful place are the same place, that these two things do not resolve but must be held simultaneously, that you can love and resent and depend on and be constrained by a thing at once, that this is not confusion but clarity. You read until the candle needs changing, and Mrs. Polly changes the candle and you read again. After a while, the room settles. The evening deepens. Mr. Crane, who has not said anything since the story about the box and the 30 years and the laugh, is asleep in his corner by the grate, his head against the wall, his breathing slow and not entirely clear, but not the crisis breathing of the worst weeks. Mrs. Polly remains beside him, doing nothing, just present. The stillness of her is reliable as the wall. The others sleep in their stages. Michael first. The dock work exhaustion that takes him out by 9. Tommy by 10. The specific collapse of a 14-year-old who has spent his day in motion. Ellen last as usual. She lies on her portion of the pallet with her eyes open for a long time, looking at something above her that isn't there, the private processing of the room's quiet hours. You lie in the dark and listen to the building, the pipe in the north wall, the court below, the dog beginning its night speech. A cart on Flower and Dean Street slow. The horse's hooves on the cobblestones, the hollow sound of it, moving through the silence of 2 in the morning with the unhurried confidence of something with somewhere to be. 14 months ago you arrived at Paddington with a canvas bag and 2 shillings and 4pence, and the specific terror of a person who has just understood for the first time the scale of what they've come to. 14 months ago the room was a place you arrived at because it was the cheapest thing Mrs. Connolly could find for you, and because the alternative was the street, and the room smelled the way it smells, and the floor was cold, and 8 people was impossible, and the stone settled into your chest on the first night, and you thought, this is temporary. It is not temporary. It is not permanent either, in the sense that you will not be here forever, that something will change, that the city is always changing around you and within you, and some change will come that shifts the arithmetic, that makes the 10pence margin larger or smaller, or different in some way you can't currently see. Something will change because everything changes in a city this size. The city is a machine of change. It takes people in and pushes them through and produces different people at the other end, and you are 14 months into this process and already different and will be more different still. But tonight is not the future's business. Tonight the stone is the weight of this room and its people, and the things they have shared without discussing them, The bread and the coal and the condensed milk and the small coins put on the mantelpiece without comment, and the violets in the enamel mug, and the apple, and Mrs. Polly's hand on Mr. Crane's shoulder, and the laugh, the brief, extraordinary laugh, about the dovetail joints that weren't right and held for 30 years. Tonight the stone has found its level. You are warm enough, not as warm as you'd like, never as warm as you'd like, but warm enough. You have eaten enough today. The left boot's heel is sound. The seams of the shift are sound. The earrings are on their nail by your sleeping place, the small brass drops catching the last of the cold street light through the window. Tomorrow there will be the mangle and the irons and Widow Tench's eye on the collars. Tomorrow there will be the penny for bread and the 3p for supper and the 2 shillings and 3p for Mr. Fitch. Tomorrow there will be the stone and the arithmetic and the cold floor under your bare feet before first light. But there will also be this, Annie's hand on your end of the sheet from the mangle, the companionship of the shared weight, the Wednesday interval with the 6 of you talking about your real lives in the steam of the laundry, the Gaskell novel waiting in the canvas bag, Nora Faherty reading over your shoulder in the candlelight, Patrick attempting to walk from wall to wall and falling and getting up. There will be Mrs. Polly's tea. This city will consume some of the people in this room. That is true, and you know it, and there's no useful purpose in pretending otherwise. The mathematics of Whitechapel in 1884 are the mathematics of an economy that needs bodies more than it needs the people in them, that processes human life the way the factories process materials, taking in the raw and producing the finished and discarding the waste, and what falls into the discard category and what doesn't is not entirely in anyone's control. Mr. Crane's lungs, Tommy's edges, Ellen's closed door, the anonymous Elsie who was 3 days late on a February Friday and then was gone. But also, you are here. You got here and you stayed here and you will be here tomorrow. You know the streets now, you know the hours, you know the weight of a mangle handle and the trick of the lock and the price of a shift at Petticoat Lane and the 2-street walk to the clean pump. You know Mrs. Polly's face and what it looks like when it's showing what it's thinking. You know the sound of 8 people sleeping and which one is Mr. Crane and which one is Tommy and which silence is Ellen still awake. You're becoming the kind of person who knows where they are. This is not a small thing in a city that doesn't offer it easily. Your eyes are heavy. The sounds of the building have settled into the night register, the deeper, quieter version of the constant noise, and you're submerging into it the way you do every night now, the submergence that used to take an hour of rigid wakefulness, and now takes only this long, only this, the slow descent of a body that has used itself up in the best possible sense. The body that worked and walked and carried and negotiated and wrapped its cracked hands in linen and is now doing the thing it most essentially knows how to do, which is rest. Somewhere in the city above and below and around you, hundreds of thousands of people are in their own rooms. Some of them are rooms like this one, some of them are better, some of them are worse than you can currently imagine, though the city would show you if you looked. All of them are doing this same thing, this oldest human thing, the nightly return to the dark, the church on Commercial Street, its bell, distant but clear in the silence, marking the hour. 2 o'clock in the morning, the room, the 8 people, the crack in the floorboard where the fourpence live, the book in the canvas bag, the earrings on the nail, Mr. Crane's breathing, slow and imperfect and ongoing. Mrs. Polly, still, let it come. Let the night take this room the way it takes all rooms. Gently, the slow replacement of the waking world with the sleeping one. The withdrawal of consciousness from the cold floor and the damp walls and the gap in the window and the stone in the chest, the temporary reprieve that sleep offers, the nightly return to somewhere without arithmetic, somewhere without rent and margins and cracked hands, somewhere that is just the body resting in the dark. You worked today. You will work tomorrow. You are learning the trade of surviving, which is its own kind of trade, its own set of skills that you are acquiring with the same focused attention you bring to the mangle, to the irons, to the negotiation at Petticoat Lane, to the delicate ongoing management of the tenpence margin. You're getting good at it. Let the sounds fade. Let the building settle. Let Mr. Crane's breathing be what it is and not what you're afraid it might become. Just for tonight, just for these hours, let it simply be the sound of someone sleeping. Let Nora Fairty dream about her slate, about the words she's learning, about the doors that words are. Let Patrick sleep the perfect sleep of 18 months old. Let the room be what it is, the room that is terrible and the room that is home, the room that costs 2 shillings and 3pence per person per week, the room that is 12 feet by 9 feet with 8 people in it, the room with the calendar from 1878 still on the wall, and the gap where the floorboard was, and the peeling newspaper headlines and the one window with the sacking for a pane. Let it be enough. It is enough. You've been here 14 months and you are still here, and the stone in your chest has found its level, and you know where you are, and you know who sleeps 3 feet from you on the floor, and you know which board not to step on, and you know how to fold the sheet from the mangle so that Widow Tench nods rather than frowns. You know where the library is. You know what violets smell like at a street stall on a Sunday morning. You know that dovetail joints that aren't quite right can hold for 30 years. You know the sound of this city at 2 a.m, and you know how to be inside it, inside the sound of it, inside the life of it, this enormous, indifferent, beautiful, brutal life that you have been living 1 tenpence margin at a time. You know enough. Rest now. Let the city murmur around you. Let it do the things it does without you for these hours. Let it run its night business through its dark streets without requiring your attention. The morning will come, it always does, but that's the morning's business. Right now there is just the dark and the breathing and the room that holds you, inadequate and irreplaceable, the 12-foot by 9-foot fact of it, the place where you have lived and will continue to live, where things break and are mended and break again and people leave and new people come, and the seasons turn inside the same damp walls, and the cracks in the floorboard keep the fourpence safe, and the stone in your chest is real, and the room is home. And both of these things are true, and both of them are the same thing, held together the way the dovetail joints held, not perfectly but sufficiently, for all the time that matters. Good night.